Big Shaq never planned to wear a ring. But when Juliette Voss, a mysterious white woman, whispers, "Pretend to be my husband, just for one day," he steps into a lie wrapped in silk and secrets. What begins as a favor turns into a storm of buried crimes, racial betrayal, and a truth too dangerous to ignore. He thought he was protecting her. He didn't know he was exposing an empire. And when the past comes knocking, it doesn't ask permission. It demands justice. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Afternoon sun filtered through the towering windows of the Atlanta Civic Hall, bathing the space in a warm, optimistic glow. Beneath the gentle hum of benefactors and blazered elites, Big Shaq stood, his towering presence almost serene, until the whisper. A soft voice broke through the polite laughter echoing off marble floors. The words delivered close enough for his ear alone. "Sir, can you pretend to be my husband, just for one day?" He turned. His eyes, dark and measured, met Juliette Voss's, slender, pale. Her pale blonde hair, perfectly styled to frame angular cheekbones. Her mouth trembled, but her words held a steady conviction. In that moment, amidst the charity gala's refined chaos, a single phrase carried years of hidden tension and unspoken necessity. Shaq, calm despite his innate magnetism, inclined his head. He surveyed his surroundings. Waitstaff pouring champagne, guests murmuring behind handheld plates of hors d'oeuvres, city leaders exchanging tight-lipped smiles. All of it felt distant, as if Juliette's words had shifted the air between them, making everything else blur. Time stretched for a heartbeat. Then he spoke. Low. "Why?" His tone wasn't demanding, just curious. Her response was a stutter. First, disbelief. Then resolve. "It's complicated." She glanced at a tall, silver-haired man standing near the buffet, his expression hollow. Juliette swallowed. "Just one day," she repeated. "After tonight, I disappear. I don't ask for money, I just..." She exhaled sharply, scanning the room. "I need a face they'll accept." With that, she scooped up her clutch, and with a nod asked him to walk with her. Shaq followed, silent, commanding a protector drawn into her orbit. The gala sprawled out behind them like a stage. Shaq and Juliette stepped onto the sidewalk, where marathonifying cars hummed, and afternoon traffic whispered reminders of the outside world. Concrete underfoot, city's heartbeat. Their conversation continued, perfumed by distant horns and muffled bus announcements. Juliette's voice cracked when she revealed her name. I'm Juliette Voss." She pressed a single palm-sized photograph into Shaq's hand. Her and a dark-haired man, smiles frozen in lighter times. No caption, no names, just a couple and laughter. He's powerful," she said, voice brittle. "Powerful enough that pretending spousal familiarity becomes a shield. Just a day. That's all I need." Shaq flipped the image up and down, studying what he couldn't read in her words. He sensed, like he did on the court, that the request carried layers, and something delicate and dangerous lay beneath. Juliette exhaled, leaning slightly into his space. "Trust me," she said, but before Shaq could respond, a passing server knocked into her, almost spilling champagne across her silk dress. Shaq caught her elbow, steadying her gently. Their eyes met again, no strangers now. Complicit in something yet unwritten. He didn't agree yet, but he didn't refuse either. They re-entered the hall, and Shaq, with Juliette's hand lightly on his arm, slipped into the throng. Someone applauded as the host took the stage, an environmentalist rallying for donations. Big Shaq offered to escort Juliette to quieter quarters. She nodded, relief flashing in her green eyes. He guided her through corridors lined with polished marble and tall pillars, toward a scuffed service stairwell where voices couldn't follow. Inside, Juliette leaned against peeling paint and concrete dimness, her spine rigid, her composure flickered. She looked younger here. Shaq watched. He imagined lines of pressure across her temples, stories she didn't dare say. He lifted the photograph again, illuminated by faint streetlight filtering through a narrow window. "Who is he?" Her chest tightened. Then, softly, she said, "My husband, or at least a man who claimed to be. I married him because he promised safety, status. He gave me what I needed to survive. But in return, I became part of his world, and I'm not sure I knew what I was agreeing to." She swallowed hard. "One of his associates recognized me tonight. He's looking for me." Her gaze dropped away from Shaq's tie. She clasped and unclasped her hands. "I thought If I had a public face, someone important beside me, it'd buy me time. Even just hours. You look important. It wasn't a compliment nor a plea. It was armor, carefully woven with fear. Shaq's towering frame softened. He tucked in a loose thread of her logic. She needed time. He could be that timekeeper. She needed to move through suspicion unchecked. And he, Shaquille O'Neal, had that presence. He held out the photograph. If I help, he said, I need to know what danger I'm stepping into. He lifted one eyebrow. Juliet nodded, shoulders hunched with exhaustion and adrenaline. She cleared her throat. He, Marcellus Voss, my husband, may have connections that go deep. Powerful businessmen, men in politics, people who don't look twice at destroying what or who they deem threats. If I skip town tonight, they vanish after me. He finds me. Shaq processed it. No one else was privy to this. This narrow stairwell held their secret until it seeped into the hallways. He stood there with her in fluorescent dimness. He weighed the risk and the cost. She needed someone with visibility, someone fearless enough to stand beside her in public. And for once, it wasn't about basketball or fame. It was about humanity. He nodded, quietly. One day, let's do it. Relief washed across her face. She released a shaky laugh, the first hint of a fragile smile. They stayed in the stairwell long enough to let her composure settle, and then they returned just in time for the gala's crescendo. Shaq guided her to the center of the hall, approached the microphone stand that had been left behind. Security moved in curiosity. Shaq raised his palm. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice rolled smooth, unexpected, commanding. He cleared his throat. This evening has been about helping those in need. Admiration sparked in some eyes. I'd like to present my wife Juliet Voss. The sentence landed, heavy as a stone dropped in a pond, and rings of silent shock and surprise spread outward. Juliet, unprepared, caught everyone's attention by leaning into his arm. She smiled, an act of courage. Cameras flashed. Shaq escorted her through the shifting tides of astonished faces, their path illuminated by interest and whispers. In that moment, beneath the watchful gaze of allies and adversaries alike, Big Shaq became her shield. And Juliet, for once, walked with purpose. Their facades aligned, lying together like two halves of a rare coin, convinced. The real danger waited beyond that afternoon light. But for now, on downtown Atlanta's polished hardwood and marble, they were husband and wife just for one day. As they exited the crowd toward waiting cars, Juliet's hush nearly lost beneath the hum of the evening. Thank you, she breathed. Shaq didn't answer. He simply nodded, his gaze scanning the facade of faces, anticipating the next move. Their game had begun, and neither one was playing to lose. And so the sun dipped toward the horizon, ghosting day into night, while two strangers, bound by whispered desperation, walked into Atlanta's dimming glow, heartbeats measured in sync, preparing for everything the next 24 hours would bring. Understood. Here's the script for. The road to the estate twisted like a question no one wanted to ask. Green stretched on both sides, rolling fields, white fences, tall oaks draped in Spanish moss. Shaq sat beside Juliet in the back of the car, windows down just enough to let in the sweet rot of summer. She was quiet, fixing a pearl earring as if it anchored her to the moment. He watched her with a detached calm, as if gauging whether she still meant to follow through. She didn't look back. The closer they came to the estate, the more her spine straightened, like she was bracing for impact. The estate revealed itself slowly, a plantation-style home with wide steps, white columns and history clinging to its walls like invisible vines. The kind of place built on old money, inherited power and secrets too heavy to name. Shaq adjusted the collar of his fitted gray suit, glancing at the iron-wrought gate that creaked open. The air shifted, heavy with expectation. They were announced at the door by a butler, with a stony expression. Mr. and Mrs. O'Neal, he said, careful not to blink. Shaq felt the words roll across the room like a tide that didn't quite belong. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected on polished floors, and voices hushed as they entered. The crowd tilted toward them, too eager, too curious. Eyes scanned their hands, their clothes, the space between them. Shaq nodded graciously, offering a quiet smile, while Juliet's grip on his arm tightened. The host, a broad-shouldered man in a three-piece suit, named Pierce Whitlow, approached with a wineglass and too wide a smile. Juliet, he drawled, and this must be Your husband? The pause dragged a half-second too long, slicing the air between words. Shaq extended a hand. Good to meet you, Pierce. Pierce chuckled, shaking it with a grip that said more than it should. Well now, it's not every day Juliet surprises us. His eyes flicked over Shaq's suit, lingered on his face, then darted back to Juliet. You've been busy. She smiled politely, ignoring the thorns in his tone. Life's full of surprises. The crowd resumed its movements, slow circles of champagne and half-hearted laughter. But Shaq noticed the pattern. Guests approached Juliet with frozen smiles, subtle nods, and half-truths wrapped in Southern courtesy. They asked about her journeys, her return, her unusual choice in company. The words weren't weapons, but they cut all the same. Shaq stood like a stone in a stream, immovable, observant. Conversations curved around him. He heard whispers caught mid-sentence, coded language wrapped in civility. He could read the eyes' discomfort hiding behind practiced elegance. Men laughed too loud. Women clutched pearls with unconscious fingers. Someone asked what business he was in. He said philanthropy. They nodded, but their eyes said, not from here. Dinner was announced with a soft bell. Long table, gleaming silver, name cards. Shaq and Juliet sat near the center, flanked by aging senators and real estate moguls, with two tight tuxedos. Pierce stood at the head, carving a roast with flair. Conversation turned toward politics, subtle, then sharp. Someone praised a recent bill aimed at cleaning up the city. Juliet flinched. Shaq raised an eyebrow. A woman in a navy dress leaned toward him, voice syrupy. You must be quite the asset to Juliet. How does it feel to be part of such a distinguished circle? Shaq smiled slowly. This circle seems pretty familiar with drawing lines. Her face froze. She chuckled, confused. Oh, I didn't mean. I know. His voice was calm, final. She looked away. Juliet didn't speak much during dinner. Her knife moved mechanically, her eyes never resting in one place too long. Across the table sat a man who hadn't spoken yet. Mid-40s, crisp haircut, sharp jawline. His stare never left Juliet. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He drank red wine like it was blood. Shaq caught the look, tilted his head slightly. The man nodded, as if they'd been introduced in some other life. He lifted his glass and mouthed something across the room. Shaq didn't need to hear it to understand. After dinner, guests drifted into the parlor for drinks. A jazz quartet played near the fireplace, soft brass blending with murmurs. Juliet excused herself for a moment, and Shaq wandered to a window, watching the moonlight spill over the lawn. Someone approached from behind. Not used to being the only one like you in a room like this, huh? The voice was masculine, oily. Shaq turned. It was the man from dinner. His name was Bryant Keeling. Introduced himself with too much ease. Shaq met his gaze. I've been the only one in rooms like this for most of my life. Doesn't mean I let them make the rules. Bryant's smile widened. And here I thought Juliet would have married one of us. Guess she still likes to surprise. Shaq's eyes narrowed. You always this interested in other people's marriages? Bryant leaned in. Just hers. That landed heavy. Shaq didn't flinch. Instead, he folded his arms and held the silence like a weapon. Bryant's grin faltered. She's not who she says she is, you know, Bryant added. She runs when things get real. Leaves people ruined in her wake. And now you, what are you, her savior? Shaq stayed still. What I am, he said, is not someone you can intimidate. Bryant backed off, raising both palms like a joke had ended. Just being neighborly, he said, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. Juliet returned moments later, visibly rattled. Her lipstick had been redone. Her hair was pinned tighter. She avoided Shaq's eyes for a second too long. Bryant said something. Shaq stated, not asked. She nodded once. He used to be my husband's lawyer, before he decided truth was negotiable. Her jaw tightened. They don't forget faces around here. Or debts. Shaq exhaled slowly. You still want to go through with this? Juliet met his eyes. Her answer was quiet. I have to. The night wound down. Guests trickled out, with polite farewells and wine-blushed cheeks. Shaq and Juliet stepped into the foyer, as the valet pulled up the car. Pierce appeared again, handing Juliet a sealed envelope. From your family, he said, face unreadable. She took it without opening it. They didn't speak on the ride back into the city. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was understood, heavy. Shaq stared out the window, watching the stars dim behind downtown's glow. Juliet held the envelope on her lap like a ticking clock. At a red light, she finally whispered, "Thank you for not letting them shake you." Shaq looked over. "They tried," he said, "but I don't break easy." She smiled faintly. "Tired. That man watching me, he'll come closer now." Tonight was a message. Shaq didn't flinch. "Let him come." She turned her face to the window. "It was never just one day," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "It never could be." The light turned green. The car pulled forward, and the mansion faded behind them like a ghost caught in the rear view. The game had changed. What began as a lie for protection was spiraling into something deeper, more dangerous, and far more real. "Certainly. Here's the next section of your story." The next morning, light broke through the apartment windows in crooked patterns, cutting across the floor like jagged memories. Shaq sat in a high-backed chair at Juliet's downtown condo, legs stretched out, thumbing through a photo album he'd found tucked beneath the credenza in her living room. The edges were worn, pages yellowed slightly, but the faces inside were sharp, too sharp. Juliet was there in a soft pink dress, laughing beside a man with eyes like polished steel. He was handsome in a severe way. Everything about him screamed precision. In one photo, he held her close at a gala. In another, they stood before a fireplace, her smile brittle under his grip. Shaq didn't know the man, but he recognized the look. Possession disguised as partnership, control wrapped in charm. He hadn't asked Juliet's permission to go through the album. But then again, she hadn't exactly volunteered anything either. Since the night at the estate, she'd been different. Not scared, exactly, but like something had reawakened inside her. And now she was trying to stay one step ahead of it. She was in the kitchen now, making coffee she wouldn't drink. "You ever think about telling the whole story?" Shaq asked, not looking up. Juliet didn't answer right away. She poured hot water over the ground slowly, as if trying to buy herself a few more seconds. "What story?" she replied finally, her voice casual but tight. "The one you've been living since long before you asked me to play your husband." She carried 2 mugs to the table, setting his down without meeting his gaze. "Some stories don't end well. That's why people stop telling them." Shaq opened to another page. This one was different. A receipt was tucked between the photos. A hotel bill dated just 3 weeks ago. Same last name, same initials. It didn't add up. "You said he's gone," he said carefully. "But this says otherwise." Juliet didn't move. "He was supposed to be gone," she whispered. "He told me he'd leave me alone if I disappeared, if I erased myself from his world. But some people, they don't let go. They rewrite endings." Shaq leaned forward. "So what is he? Threat? Ghost?" Her eyes lifted. "Finally. All of the above." It was the first honest thing she'd said in days, and it hit like cold water. She reached for the mug, warming her hands against it. "His name is Marshall Voss. He owns a development firm. He invests in campaigns. He makes friends in dark places, and enemies disappear in paperwork." She paused, her fingers trembling slightly. "At first I thought I could manage it. I played the role, smiled at fundraisers, nodded when asked. I convinced myself I was safe, as long as I followed the script. But then he changed." She set the mug down. "Untouched. He became obsessed with control. Not just over me, but over every piece of my life. My accounts, my friends, even my body. I was property, and when I tried to leave the first time, he threatened to burn everything down. Said I'd end up in a place no one could find." Shaq's jaw tensed, not in anger, but in understanding. She wasn't telling this to get pity. She was telling it because it was the only truth left between them. He nodded slowly. "So the night at the estate, what was that? A warning?" Juliet nodded. "Bryant wasn't just there for drinks. He was there to remind me that I still belong to that world. That even when I vanish they can reach in and pull me back." Shaq sat back in his chair. The pretense was unraveling fast. This wasn't a one-day favor. It never had been. He looked around the apartment, minimalist, sterile, filled with art that didn't belong to her. Every corner screamed temporary. "You were never planning to stay gone, were you?" Juliet's laugh was hollow. "I was planning to run, and I still might. But not until I figure out what he's hiding." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You think he's hiding something more?" She pulled a small folder from a drawer near the couch, and slid it toward him. These are copies. Financial statements. Emails I wasn't supposed to read. Marshall's company is tied to a private security firm. Not legal on paper but active. Real estate deals tied to forced evictions in minority neighborhoods. Buyouts. That never made the news. It's more than greed. It's a game of erasure. Shaq flipped through the folder slowly. What he saw chilled him. Scanned contracts. Shell companies. Envelopes passed through hands that never left fingerprints. It wasn't just about a toxic marriage. It was about power, systemic, unchecked, and protected by silence. Juliet sat beside him now, more open than before. I thought if I could just get anyone with eyes, voice, and reach to stand next to me, I could create a delay. Something public. Enough time to decide my next move. Shaq closed the folder. His gaze stayed on the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up. You're not just trying to escape. You're trying to expose him. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. I want to live with the truth, not under it. Silence sat with them a while. Outside, the city stirred. Horns, birds, distant sirens. Shaq rubbed a hand across his face. He hadn't signed up for this, but he also hadn't turned away. Later that afternoon, they visited an old library in Midtown. Not for research, for records. Juliet guided him through basement corridors lined with boxes and forgotten filings. In a back room, she found what she was looking for. Land acquisition documents. Shaq scanned them quickly. The same pattern repeated. Predominantly black neighborhoods. Undervalued sales. Relocation incentives that never manifested. Paper trails led to names that, when followed, vanished into loopholes. Juliet pointed to one address in particular. This one used to be a youth center, until Marshall's group bought the lot. Said they were building affordable housing. It's still empty. Shaq stared at the address. He knew that center. It was where he ran drills as a teen. Where Lucille took him when he needed a place to breathe. The betrayal landed harder now. This wasn't distant corruption. It was personal. He turned to Juliet. He picked that spot on purpose. She nodded. To erase what it represented. They left the library in silence, walking past rows of offices and street musicians. The city moved around them, indifferent to secrets and schemes. Shaq felt the shift deep in his bones. He wasn't pretending anymore. Not for her, not for them. He was in it. That evening, back at the apartment, Juliet opened her closet and retrieved a small black box. Inside was a flash drive. This has everything. Emails, recordings, contracts. If anything happens to me, you take this to someone who'll care. Shaq took it without a word. He slid it into his jacket pocket and sat down. He didn't ask who she feared most, Marshall, his lawyers, or the silence. He just said, "You won't be alone." Juliet turned off the lights. They sat in the dusk, side by side, shadows stretched long against the wall. Two people tied by something neither of them could name. Truth, maybe, or the price of telling it. Either way, the lie was done. Now came the reckoning. Certainly. Here's the script for... The sky had begun to dim when Shaq finally picked up his phone. He stood on the rooftop of Juliet's apartment building, the evening breeze brushing against his skin, carrying the scent of the city below, grilled food, car exhaust, and summer heat beginning to cool. He hadn't answered the first 3 calls, but the fourth came with a name that always carried weight. Lucille. His mother didn't ask why it took so long. She never did. Her voice was soft but certain, a steady rhythm in the static hum between them. "You all right, baby?" she asked, not out of politeness, but because she already knew he wasn't. Shaq exhaled slowly. "I'm in something, Ma." Lucille paused. "You always are." There was quiet. Then he told her, at least parts of it. About Juliet, about the dinner, the photographs, the man in the shadows, about how he agreed to pretend, but now he wasn't so sure what was real and what wasn't. He didn't tell her about the flash drive or the real estate documents. He didn't need to. Lucille heard more in silence than most people heard in speeches. "She says she's running," he added, "from someone dangerous. Says she needs a face beside her. Said I looked like protection." Lucille didn't answer right away. She let the wind fill the gap, the rustling of her own breath in some quiet Florida kitchen drifting through the line. "Do you remember what your granddaddy used to say?" she asked finally. Shaq closed his eyes. "A favor ain't free. It just hasn't named its price yet." Lucille chuckled softly. "That's right. He said people don't always know what they're asking. that they know when they're hiding. He leaned against the edge of the railing, the cityscape stretching wide and unsolved before him. You think she's hiding something? I think she's scared, Lucille said. But scared people don't always tell you the truth. They tell you what they need you to believe. Shaq felt that land deep in his chest. He'd seen it before, men in business suits, politicians at fundraisers, even fans in the front row. Not everyone who asked for help wanted saving. Some just wanted cover. She showed me pieces, he said. Files, names, the kind of things people get buried for. Lucille sighed. And why you, son? Why not a lawyer? A reporter? Why a man with a name, a face, and a history of helping everyone but himself? The question sat heavy between them. Shaq didn't answer right away. He thought of Juliet's eyes that first day, wide, urgent, not broken but cracked. He thought of how she never asked him twice, how she offered no compensation. Just the words and a look that said, trust me, and how against all logic he did. You always want to see the good, Lucille continued. That's your heart. But remember this, Shaquille, your kindness is not an invitation. It's a gift. Don't let folks turn it into currency. Her voice shifted then, softer, more maternal. I raised you to help when help was needed, not when it was convenient. But I also raised you to ask, what's the cost? Shaq looked out across the rooftops, eyes landing on nothing in particular. What if she is telling the truth? He asked. What if all of it's real? Then you stand tall, Lucille said. But not blind. You keep your feet planted. You protect her, but don't forget to protect yourself. Shaq nodded slowly, as if she could see it through the line. Thanks, Ma. You don't owe the world your peace, baby, she added, her voice fading into a hum. Not even when it cries out like it does. The call ended, but her words stayed. Shaq stood there for a long time, watching lights flicker on in buildings across the city. He thought about dignity, about deception, about how history wasn't just something that sat in books. It lived in bodies, in memory, in the way people chose who to trust. Downstairs, Juliet was making dinner. She had said she was tired of takeout. She wanted to cook something familiar, something that made her feel like herself again. But Shaq couldn't help wondering who was that exactly. When he re-entered the apartment, the smell of roasted garlic filled the space. She was at the stove, humming something low and tuneless. He watched her for a moment, her back to him, the curve of her shoulder tense. Careful. Everything okay? She asked without turning. Shaq didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, but not too close. You ever wonder if the truth's just another mask? She looked over her shoulder, her smile faint. Every day. They ate in silence. The air between them calm but heavy. And as Juliet passed him a bowl of salad, Shaq remembered his mother's words again. Not as a warning, but as a map. Help but stay awake. Care but don't be consumed. Because in stories like this, truth wasn't the only thing hiding. Sometimes the biggest secret was why it needed to be told at all. Absolutely. Here's the script for The estate stood like a monument to omission, vast and unnervingly silent under the cloudless Georgia sky. Shaq stepped out of the car first, feeling the gravel shift beneath his shoes like it remembered who had last walked there. And Juliet followed, hesitant, her gaze locked on the gabled roof and long verandas. She hadn't returned to her family's property in years, she'd said. Not since the divorce, not since the silence. Yet here they were, retracing ghosts she never wanted to name. They moved through the wide entrance with deliberate steps. Inside, the air was cool and stale, smelling faintly of lemon polish and history kept too quiet. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that filtered through gauzy curtains. A clock ticked somewhere in the hall, too loud, too slow. This house, Juliet murmured, brushing her fingers across the stair banister, was built by my grandfather. Every corner has a secret. My mother used to call it the house with two shadows. One for what it was, one for what it pretended to be. Shaq stayed quiet. He didn't need to say what he was thinking. The place felt wrong, not haunted, but heavy, as if it resented visitors. They started upstairs. She led him to the master bedroom first. It was preserved like a museum display. The bed made, the nightstands untouched. A photograph of Juliet and Marshall still framed beside the reading lamp. Her face was different in the image. Brighter, yes, but too perfect, manufactured. He stared at it longer than he meant to until Juliet pulled open the curtains and let in the light. Look, she said softly, motioning to the corner of the room. Shaq followed her gaze to a door he hadn't noticed. Not because it was hidden, but because it was designed not to matter. Flush with the wall, handle faded to match the wallpaper. Juliet turned the knob slowly. It creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down. Not to the ground floor, but somewhere between the floors. And in between. Shaq's brows furrowed. "This was my father's study," she explained, voice low. "No one else was allowed. Not even my mother." They descended. The staircase was dark, dust collected on each step like a memory thickened over time. At the bottom, a door opened into a small chamber lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets. A single desk sat beneath a green-shaded banker's lamp. Unlit, it felt untouched, abandoned and preserved at once. Shaq opened one drawer, rifling through old checkbooks, account ledgers, handwritten notes with names and coded references. One caught his attention. Evans Park. Transfer cleared. Do not retain docs. He recognized the name. Another one of those neighborhoods Marshall's company had quietly overtaken. "Why keep these?" Shaq asked. Juliet shrugged. "Control, maybe. Or guilt." Behind the desk, a bookshelf was slightly uneven. Shaq reached for it, fingers catching a latch behind a row of hardcovers. The wall clicked, shifted slightly, then swung open to reveal a crawlspace. Juliet's breath hitched. It was barely tall enough to walk into, but Shaq crouched and ducked inside. The space was lined with newspaper clippings tacked to boards. Headlines: "Local activists disappear. Development firm denies claims. Silent settlements in Brunswick." Names he recognized from Juliet's file. Victims, whistleblowers. People who had raised their voices then vanished from the conversation. Near the back corner, beneath a loose floorboard, Shaq found a small metal box, locked. The kind of lock people used when they didn't want just anyone reading what was inside. "Do you know the combination?" he asked. Juliet shook her head. "No, but my mother might have." He brought the box upstairs. Juliet searched her mother's old jewelry cabinet, producing a ring of tiny keys. After several failed attempts, one turned with a click. The lid opened. Inside was a journal, bound in black leather, pages yellowed, but intact. The first page simply read, "If you found this, you already know too much." Juliet sat down slowly. "This isn't my handwriting," she said. Shaq flipped through the pages. The script was tight, neat, obsessively organized, each entry logged with time and date. The writer detailed secret meetings between Marshall and political figures, names exchanged in low-lit restaurants, cash handed over in innocuous hotel lobbies, but more disturbing were the entries about Juliet herself. "She thinks she's free. But freedom's a shape you draw for someone else, and let them color in. Every time she pulls away, I give her enough rope to believe she's walking." Shaq's stomach twisted. This wasn't written by a woman. It was Marshall. It was a ledger of manipulation. A mind obsessed with puppeteering truth. Juliet covered her mouth as she read further. There were notes about her medical appointments, things she never told anyone, mentions of calls she never remembered making, a copy of a prescription she never filled but had apparently been charged for. "This isn't just control," Shaq muttered. "This is surveillance, psychological warfare." Juliet turned the page and gasped. The final entry, dated only a month before she approached Shaq, read, "If she runs again, I'll need someone louder to stand beside her. Someone the world will look at. Someone they'll believe, if things get messy." Shaq stared at the words. They felt targeted. Precise. His name wasn't written, but the implication was chilling. "They planned this," he said. "Not all of it, but part of it. You being seen with me, being protected by me." Juliet looked broken. "But I thought..." She trailed off. Her hands trembled on her lap. Shaq rose, pacing the room. "That dinner? That invite? It wasn't just them watching you. It was them watching us. Seeing how far you'd go. Testing whether I'd play along." The realization hit them both at once. "What if this whole thing wasn't your escape?" Shaq continued, voice quiet. "What if it was his next move?" Juliet's face paled. She stood abruptly, pacing in the opposite direction. No, I chose you. I came to you. I made that decision." Shaq's voice dropped. "But he knew you would." The room went still. Outside, the wind began to pick up. The trees beyond the window swayed, casting shifting shadows across the hardwood floor. The journal lay open between them, its confessions curling like smoke into the air. Juliet knelt beside the fireplace, lifting a stone base panel and revealing another compartment. Inside, a flash drive. She handed it to Shaq. "There's more," she said. "Videos, conversations, things I copied before I left. But I didn't understand the full picture. I just wanted out." Shaq pocketed the drive. "We're past wanting. This is war." Juliet looked at him. Fear mingled with something new. Resolve. "He always told me he could rewrite the truth, if it got inconvenient. That people forget fast." Shaq shook his head. "Not this time." They left the estate just before sunset. The house loomed behind them, its windows reflecting red streaks of dying light. It looked the same as when they arrived. But inside, a layer had been peeled back. What it revealed was not just a man's cruelty, but a system's design. Shaq glanced at Juliet as they pulled onto the highway. She stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Not fragile, not saved. Just awake. The shadows had doubled, but so had the light they'd uncovered. The morning started with silence, too still, too smooth. Shaq woke up to a sunbeam stretched across the living room floor, the air stale from a night without motion. The clock read 7:43 a.m., and the space around him was empty. No sound of water running, no scent of coffee, no rustle of Juliet moving through the kitchen. He sat up slowly, his body instinctively aware of an imbalance he couldn't yet name. Her phone was still on the nightstand. Her purse lay untouched on the table, but Juliet was gone. He searched the apartment methodically, room by room. The door was locked from the inside. No note, no message, just the absence of her presence, echoing louder with each passing minute. Shaq stood by the window, phone in hand, wondering whether to call someone. Who exactly, he wasn't sure, and that's when the knock came. 3 heavy raps. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers, stone-faced. No neighbors in sight. Shaq opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The taller of the 2 officers, a man with sandy hair and narrow eyes, tilted his head. "You Shaquille O'Neal?" Shaq blinked. "Yeah. We're looking for Juliet Voss. We received a call this morning. Welfare check." "She's not here," Shaq replied slowly. "She was here last night. But this morning, she your wife?" The second officer interrupted, hand on his holster. Shaq hesitated. The answer wasn't simple. Legally, no. Technically, he'd been pretending. Functionally, it was more complicated. He opted for honesty. Not legally. That was the wrong answer. The taller officer stepped forward. "But she's been living here, and you've been presenting yourselves as married. That makes you a person of interest." Shaq's brow furrowed. A person of interest in what? The officers didn't explain. One stepped past him without permission, eyes scanning the apartment. The other stayed by the door, subtly blocking the exit. Shaq's voice tightened. "Do you have a warrant?" The first officer didn't respond. "Where were you between 2 and 5 a.m.? "Right here," Shaq said evenly. "Sleeping. Alone." The officer glanced at the bedroom. The undisturbed bed, the lack of anything to contradict him. Still, his stance said suspicion, not belief. "You said she vanished," the second cop added. "What makes you so sure she didn't run from you?" Shaq exhaled, slow and steady. "I'm not the one you should be looking at."
The moment thickened. The first officer's hand hovered near his belt. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us for further questioning."
Shaq's shoulders straightened. He didn't raise his voice. "Unless you have a charge or a warrant, I'm not going anywhere." The officer took a step closer. Shaq stood his ground. A heartbeat passed. And then a new voice entered the room. "Hold on." From the hallway came Detective Harmon, tall, black, sharp suit, and a presence that halted everything. He flashed a badge as he walked in. "I'll take it from here." The officers looked at each other. "We've got protocol to follow." Harmon cut them off with a glance. "And I've got jurisdiction. Unless you want to explain to the commissioner why you're detaining Shaquille O'Neal over a missing white woman with no evidence of a crime, I suggest you stand down." They backed off reluctantly, the tension peeling away but not dissolving. Harmon turned to Shaq, eyes sharp but not hostile. "You okay?" Shaq nodded slowly. "Been better." They stepped into the kitchen. Harmon lowered his voice. "You're lucky I picked this call off the wire. If I hadn't, this would have gone sideways. Fast." Shaq leaned against the counter. "They think I did something?" Harmon frowned. "The call came from someone anonymous. claimed there was shouting. A domestic incident. Said Juliet might be in danger. There wasn't any shouting, Shaq replied. There wasn't anything. She was here last night. This morning she was gone. Harmon studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I believe you. But someone wanted the optics to say otherwise. Shaq's jaw clenched. This was a setup. That's my guess, Harmon said. And whoever did it knew how it would look. The detective stepped toward the table, eyes scanning the apartment. You said she left everything? No phone, no bag? Shaq nodded. Nothing was taken. No sign of struggle. Then she left on purpose. Harmon concluded. And someone wanted to make sure her exit made you look guilty. Shaq turned toward the window. His reflection stared back, distorted by the morning light. You think Marshall did this? Harmon didn't answer directly. Let's just say your name carries weight. And people know that putting you in the wrong headline would bury the real story. Shaq reached into his jacket and pulled out the flash drive Juliet had given him. She left this. Said it had everything. Harmon took it carefully. I'll take it to our tech team. If what she told you is true, it's going to raise hell. Shaq looked at him. And if it's not, then we're all standing in the middle of a very expensive lie. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Harmon added, lay low. If you hear from her, call me. Don't talk to anyone else. Not media, not lawyers, not friends. This is moving fast now. Shaq nodded. Harmon left with the flash drive, and the officers followed. Reluctantly, the door closed behind them, leaving Shaq alone again in the apartment that had become more story than shelter. He sat down, staring at the space where Juliet had last stood. Her absence was no longer a mystery. It was a message. And he wasn't sure who it was meant for. But he knew this much. Someone wanted him silent. Someone wanted him framed. And whoever that was had underestimated how far he was willing to go to find the truth. The system was tightening its grip. But Big Shaq wasn't breaking. Certainly. Here's the script for. The apartment was dark, except for the soft amber glow of a single table lamp, casting long bending shadows across the floor. Shaq sat on the couch, the black leather journal resting heavy in his lap, like it knew it was about to confess. Hours had passed since the police left, since Harmon took the flash drive. But Shaq hadn't moved. He'd waited until now to open the journal. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he feared what it would reveal. Maybe he already knew. He flipped the cover open. The first page bore no date. Just a sentence. I don't know when I became the villain. Shaq leaned forward, elbows on knees. The words were in Juliet's handwriting. Tight, clean, exact. Not rushed, not hysterical, just precise. Like someone trying to record shame in the only language she had left. It didn't start with Marshall. It started with me. Or rather, it started the moment I chose silence, when I should have screamed. The entries rolled out in pieces. Not daily, not even consistent. Some were short, half a page. Others rambled through emotions she clearly didn't want to touch. But they painted a picture far more complex than the woman who had whispered at a gala for a stranger to pretend to love her. The Juliet in these pages wasn't hiding from a man. She was hiding from a younger version of herself. I was 22 when I watched a boy get handcuffed for a crime he didn't commit. I watched it from the back of a car with tinted windows while Marshall shook hands with the DA and assured him we'd handle it quietly. I said nothing. That boy's name was Devin Marks. Shaq stilled. The name triggered something. He remembered the case. A teenager arrested after being near a breaking and entering in Buckhead. No weapon found. No prints. But Devin had priors, graffiti, loitering, and his skin color did the rest. He'd served 6 years before the case was dropped with no explanation. Juliet kept writing. I saw the footage. I knew he was just a kid, tagging a building that had already been gutted by developers. But they needed someone to take the fall. And Marshall needed the optics to match the agenda. His company was under fire for targeting black-owned properties. He told me, one clean headline, and we erased the noise. Devin was the cost. Shaq's hands gripped the journal tighter. I remember Marshall's words after Devin was sentenced. This is how we fix things. Quietly. Efficiently. I remember nodding. I remember sipping champagne with council members while a mother cried into a courtroom floor 2 blocks away. The entries spiraled after that. Juliet tried to rationalize her silence. Privilege, fear, dependency. She blamed the lifestyle, the entrapment, the power she never asked for. but accepted anyway. But none of it washed away the truth. I wasn't coerced. I was complicit. I was a woman who watched injustice and allowed it because it benefited me. I told myself I'd fix it later. That later never came. Shaq set the journal down, his pulse drumming in his throat. He stood and walked to the window. The city below buzzing with night. Cars whispered past. Somewhere, people laughed. But in his head, all he heard was the crack of that gavel sentencing Devon Marks. He remembered the protest that followed, brief and easily dismissed. He remembered thinking justice would eventually catch up. He never imagined Juliet was inside that system, watching from behind the veil. He returned to the couch and kept reading. After the trial, I stopped sleeping. I started taking pictures of the files, the checks, the messages. Not to expose him, not yet, just so I wouldn't feel insane. I told myself the evidence would be useful. That one day, someone would need it. Maybe I hoped someone would find it and save me from myself. She described how her marriage changed after Devon. Marshall became bolder, quieter, more cruel in ways that didn't leave bruises, but scars all the same. She didn't say he beat her. She didn't need to. Control was its own kind of violence, and guilt, when buried, turns into compliance. The worst part wasn't that I didn't stop him. The worst part was that I never tried. Not really. I just wanted the noise to stop. I wanted to survive without having to sacrifice my comfort. Shaq could hear her voice in the sentences. Tired, raw, unfiltered, not polished like she'd been in person. This was the real Juliet, and the truth was uglier than the lie. But there was more. 3 weeks ago, I found out Devon was released. No apology, no payout, just a form letter, and a cold door. I saw his photo online. He looked older than his years. His eyes, God, his eyes. He looked like a man who remembered everything. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. That's when she'd found Shaq. That's when the plan started to form, not to use him but to borrow his presence, his reputation, to force her story into the light without directly naming herself. She needed him not just as a shield, but as a mirror, someone whose name carried weight in spaces where hers never would. When I asked you to pretend, I was testing fate. I wanted to see if the world would treat me different, if I stood beside someone it respected, someone whose truth could overpower my silence. Shaq sat back, staring at the ceiling. It made sense now, the sudden urgency, the strange dinner, the journal in the locked room. Juliet wasn't just fleeing Marshall. She was trying to step out from the shadow of herself. She didn't want forgiveness. She wanted the weight of truth to settle where it belonged. He turned to the last entry. I know what I did. I know who I became. But I won't run anymore. If you're reading this, it means I've either disappeared or decided to do what I should have done years ago. Confess. Not to the courts, but to the truth. Because Devon deserves that. And because, so do you. There was no signature. Just blank pages. Shaq closed the journal slowly. The night had deepened outside, but his mind was sharp. He thought of Lucille's voice. Ask what it costs. He thought of Harmon's warning. They knew what they were doing. And now, he understood the full weight of what he was holding. Juliet had been both victim and architect. Both shielded and sharp. She wasn't a woman in need of saving. She was a woman finally stepping toward consequence. And Shaq, he had been the key to that door. He stood, journal in hand, and walked toward the desk. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper and started writing. A plan. A list. People who needed to see what he'd just read. Not media first. Not politics. Community leaders. Justice advocates. The right one. The ones who wouldn't sensationalize it, but act on it. Because this wasn't just about Juliet anymore. It was about Devon Marks. And it was about all the systems that made someone like Juliet think silence was safer than justice. Shaq didn't know if she'd come back. But whether she did or not, the reckoning had already begun. Certainly. Here's the script for. The news hadn't broken yet, but Shaq knew it was only a matter of time. The weight of the journal sat in his backpack like an unexploded grenade. Its power not in the pages but in the names. Marshall Voss. Devon Marks. Real estate manipulation. Coordinated silence. A system so intricately webbed, so well-dressed, no one questioned it, until now. Shaq stood at the gates of a country club, where the Voss Foundation's annual brunch was about to begin. Security eyed him like a rumor that had turned real. He didn't need an invitation. His presence was enough. As he stepped onto the circular stone driveway, his 6'7" frame blocked sunlight. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. He was no longer just a basketball icon. He was a reckoning, dressed in tailored charcoal gray. Inside, polished tables stretched under a glass dome. Waitstaff passed out champagne and lies. Juliet's father, Gregory Voss, held court near the center, surrounded by city council members, bank presidents, and real estate giants. His smile was a brand, his handshake, a transaction. He hadn't seen Shaq yet. Shaq didn't pause. He walked past startled eyes, past the polite tension of elites who'd long forgotten how to sweat. When Gregory finally noticed, he froze mid-laugh. Shaq stopped a foot away from him, eyes locked like a man who wasn't here to ask for anything. "I need a word," Shaq said. Not loud, not soft, just firm. Gregory gestured toward a side hallway with forced calm. "This isn't the place." Shaq stepped closer. "That's what your daughter thought, and now she's missing." The hallway swallowed their voices as they walked, the murmurs behind them thick with speculation. Gregory shut the door behind them and faced Shaq with a practiced smirk. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Shaq didn't blink. He pulled the journal from his bag and held it up like a badge. "Reading, learning, connecting dots your family worked overtime to scatter." Gregory's eyes flickered. "Whatever Juliet told you, she was unstable. You don't know what she's—" Shaq cut him off. "She told the truth, and you couldn't bury it, so you buried her instead." Gregory's mask cracked just slightly. "You think people will believe that? Her word against ours?" Shaq stepped forward. "It's not just her word anymore. It's records, contracts, audio, and I have a platform." Gregory's voice dropped to a threat. "So what? You'll go online and start a war? Think this ends with a tweet and a camera crew? We own the lawyers. We own the courts." Shaq's voice stayed calm. "You don't own the people." Gregory laughed. "People forget. Scandal passes. Headlines move." Shaq leaned in. "Not when you name names. Not when you show them how deep it goes. Not when you tie it to a face they've trusted since day one." Gregory scoffed. "You'll ruin your own name." Shaq's response was steady. "Then it's worth it." He left the hallway without another word, leaving Gregory standing in the fading glow of his own control. Outside, the sun was higher now, hotter, like it knew something was about to break. Back in the city, Shaq met with Detective Harmon, handed over the original journal, the backup copies, and a list of press contacts already vetted. They didn't go straight to the media. Not yet. They built a wall first, a line of truth that couldn't be split. Within 48 hours, the leak hit online. It started small, an anonymous document dump on a secure justice reform site. Then excerpts hit social media, journal scans, quotes, audio. A short video clip of a boardroom discussion where a councilman joked about cleaning up the undesirables. The name Devon Marks trending within hours. Shaq didn't make it about himself. He didn't take interviews. Instead, he recorded one video, unfiltered, one take, no script. He sat on a wooden bench in front of the now abandoned youth center. The same building Marshall's firm had targeted years before. "Some truths don't belong to one person," he said. "They belong to all of us. This story isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about a kid who lost 6 years to silence. It's about a woman who finally spoke. And it's about what we do now that we know." The video hit 20 million views in one day. Community groups launched forums. Activists marched, not just for Devon, but for the pattern, the deeper rot. Lawsuits followed. A re-examination of Devon's trial was approved. Juliet's name returned to the conversation, no longer as a villain or victim, but as someone whose guilt turned into courage. Her journal became part of public record, not as a confession, but as a catalyst. Shaq stood beside Devon Marks, weeks later, at a press event. Devon was quiet, eyes wary, but alert. He hadn't spoken publicly in years. But that day he leaned into the mic and said, "They took 6 years from me. I don't want revenge. I want accountability." Shaq didn't speak that time. He let Devon have it. Behind the scenes, Marshall disappeared from public view. His firm lost contracts. Gregory Voss issued a statement denying everything. But it rang hollow. The truth had too many legs now, too many voices. And then one quiet morning, Shaq received a letter. No return address. Just one line. "You didn't save me. You reminded me. I could save myself." He folded the note slowly, tucking it into the journal's empty back pocket. The past was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. Juliet had vanished to choose her next chapter. Shaq? He was still right here. He returned to the youth center site with architects and community leaders. Plans were drawn. A new center would rise. Not in someone's honor, but in the name of the ones erased. Devon would help design it. Shaq would fund it. The city would see it. Because the truth doesn't lie. But people do. And when the truth is finally louder than the lie, people start listening, not just to the story, but to the silence that made it necessary. Certainly. Here's the script. It was just after dawn when she returned, stepping into the quiet of Shaq's community center office, like a breeze that had traveled too far to turn back. Her posture was different now, not defensive, not uncertain. Juliet stood with the stillness of someone who'd come full circle. She wasn't hiding behind her hair or watching the floor for escape routes. She looked directly at Shaq, and though the shadows under her eyes hadn't faded, her gaze was clear. "I'm ready," she said. Shaq didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't need to. Some stories don't belong in words. They live in silence, in the way someone re-enters a room, no longer as a burden, but as a witness. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. There was no need for theatrics. Instead, Shaq rose from behind the desk, nodded once, and grabbed the folder that held every detail of the case. Devon's name, the journal pages, the sealed affidavits Juliet had finally agreed to sign. It was time. The courthouse sat in the center of the city like a monument to memory, a place where truth was too often twisted, reshaped by who could afford the best story. But that day, it didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a threshold. Juliet walked beside Shaq, her pace steady, her chin lifted not in defiance, but in clarity. They didn't hold hands. There was no pretense. What bound them wasn't romance. It wasn't even friendship in the traditional sense. It was recognition, two people from opposite worlds, who had each been silent in different ways, and who had, for a moment, shared a single, honest noise. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. A few reporters called out questions. Shaq ignored them. Juliet didn't flinch. She wore a dark navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. She looked like a woman prepared to be recorded for history, not for vanity. Inside, the courtroom was colder, quieter than expected. Devon Mark sat to the left with his new attorney, the same man who'd helped refile the wrongful imprisonment claim with the help of Harmon and a community coalition. He glanced at Juliet as she entered. No anger, just tired acknowledgement. She offered a slow, respectful nod. The judge entered. The hearing began. It wasn't a trial, not yet. It was a deposition under oath, the first step in a longer process to unravel what had been buried. Juliet took the stand. The room listened. She told everything not with dramatics but with precision. She spoke of the council meetings, the whispered deals, the night Devon's name had been selected because he was the easiest face to sell to a nervous public. She spoke of how Marshall had coached her on silence, how her family had convinced her that dissent meant disloyalty, how the truth was something expensive people leased but never owned. Shaq watched from the back row. She never looked to him for reassurance. She didn't need it. She didn't cry. Her voice only shook once. When she said Devon's name and added, "He was a boy, just a boy, and I was a grown woman, with the power to say something. And I did." The judge didn't interrupt. No one did. When Juliet stepped down from the stand, the room remained still. Devon's lawyer asked no questions. There was nothing to cross-examine. Truth, when laid bare, is rarely a debate. After the hearing, Juliet didn't linger. She walked out the front doors with Shaq beside her. Same pace, same silence. Reporters tried again. One asked, "Do you feel vindicated?" Another asked Shaq if he planned to sue. He answered neither. On the sidewalk, Juliet turned to him, the weight shifting between them, like a handover. Neither needed to acknowledge out loud. "You were never part of my story," she said, "but you helped me finish it." Shaq nodded. "You just needed someone to hold the page steady." She smiled faintly. "You still believe in people, even after all this." Shaq glanced toward the courthouse behind them. "It's not about belief. It's about making sure the next truth doesn't have to be so loud to be heard." They parted ways at the curb. She disappeared into a black car with tinted windows. Not out of secrecy, but security, arranged by Harmon, part of her cooperation deal. Her testimony was only the first thread. There would be more hearings, more names, But her part was done. She had stepped into the light, and for the first time, not burned. Shaq walked back to the youth center. Inside, a group of teens were setting up folding chairs for a mentorship session. One of them, lean, restless, and sharp-eyed, wore a hoodie with the name Devon stitched into the sleeve. Not as a brand, as a reminder. Shaq nodded to him, then turned and looked out the window. The city moved like it always did. Fast, indifferent. But for two people, one who testified and one who listened, it had shifted, just enough to matter. And that day, for all its weight, felt lighter than it had any right to be. Absolutely. Here's the final chapter. The sun bled gold across the asphalt of the community center's court, painting long shadows as the kids shuffled in, laughing, passing basketballs, tossing insults in the kind of way that meant home. Shaq stood near the baseline, arms folded, watching them like a coach, but also like something quieter, a man carrying a story too heavy to keep silent. The backboard creaked slightly, as one of the boys dunked, sneakers squealing on the paint. But Shaq's mind wasn't on the game, it was on what came after. He waited until the third round of layup drills had faded into sweat and chatter, then clapped his hands together once, sharp and full of authority. Circle up. They gathered, teenagers with chipped fingernails, mismatched socks, and hearts still tender under all the bravado. Some leaned against the wall, some flopped to the ground, others hovered like they had better things to do, but they stayed. Because when Big Shaq spoke, you stayed. He let the silence linger just long enough. I want to tell you something, he began. Not about ball, not about hustle, but about listening. A few boys exchanged looks. One mumbled, "Oh, here we go with the uncle talk," and a ripple of laughter cracked the surface. Shaq let it pass, then continued. Few months ago, I got asked something strange. A woman walked up to me at a charity event and said, "Can you pretend to be my husband, just for one day?" He watched their eyes narrow, faces shift from humor to curiosity. Now most people would have walked away. Most would have laughed. But something about the way she said it, I couldn't. He walked slowly, voice even, low. At first I thought I was doing her a favor. But turns out, I was walking into something deeper. She wasn't running from a man. She was running from herself, from something she helped break. One of the younger boys, Deshaun, raised a hand. Like what? Shaq nodded. She helped send someone to prison. A kid. Black. Innocent. Just in the wrong place when the right people needed someone to blame. The room shifted. The air grew still. She stayed quiet. For years. And when the guilt got too heavy, she came to me, not to confess, but to hide. That's what I thought. Until I realized, she wasn't just hiding. She was trying to fix it. But she didn't know how. A silence followed that no one dared fill. The story had weight now. The kind that pressed into the bones. She gave me a journal. Inside, everything. Names, deals. The plan to erase whole communities from this city. Block by block. She didn't just keep a secret. She was part of a system that lived off silence. Shaq stopped, turning his gaze to the court outside. That system doesn't just wear suits. It wears smiles. And sometimes it walks through your door with a clipboard and a handshake. One of the older teens, a wiry boy named Caleb, who rarely spoke, leaned forward. What happened to the kid? Shaq exhaled. He was released. 6 years too late. But he's free now. Caleb's face changed. A flicker of something personal, raw. Shaq watched it settle in, then reached into his bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. His name was Devon Marks. Sound familiar? A pause. Then Caleb nodded slowly, voice low. He's my cousin. Gasps stirred through the circle. Shaq didn't blink. He already knew. I didn't realize it at first, Shaq said. But when I looked at Devon's photo again, I saw it. Your jawline. His eyes. The way he carries that quiet like armor. Caleb wiped at his cheek but didn't say anything. That's why I'm telling you this, Shaq continued. Because fate isn't random. It puts people in front of you when they need to be. Or when you need them to be. The sun dipped lower. The court glowed orange and steel. Juliet testified, he said. Not for applause. Not for redemption. Just because it was time. And now people are listening. For one. He took a breath, letting the last part sit right in the center of their hearts. Sometimes, he said, pretending to be someone's husband is the only way to find out who they really are. And sometimes, that's how you find out who you are too. The kids didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just sat there still, breathing the moment in like gospel. Shaq walked to the wall, grabbed a marker, and wrote a name on the board. Devon Marks Youth Court. New name, he said. New start. We break silence here. We speak what matters. We name what they won't. As the sun finally disappeared behind the skyline, the court lights clicked on with a low hum. The boys stood. Caleb stepped forward and offered a single steady nod. No words, just thanks in the only language men like them often had. Shaq nodded back. He didn't need anything else, because some stories don't end with noise. They end with whispers strong enough to shake the silence. If this story hit you where it matters, don't let it end at the last line. Share it, question it, and carry its weight into every room that still pretends not to see. Talk louder where silence was once survival. And remember, every truth you dare to face becomes someone else's permission to speak. Stay with us. The next story might be yours.